You're listening to Skippycast. I'm David McFee. Skippycast is a podcast about hobo-like travel. In this interview, I chat with an old friend, John Clagett, and as with Nan Mandez, this was recorded back in 2018. But my history with John goes way back. I've known him now for some 25 years, back to his student exchange at my home university in Western Australia, and then his home university at the University of Missouri. As of now, John works for the Park Service out in California at Angel Island, but back when we were dirtbag university students, John was the man with the plan of living in the van. In fact, he was the man who I first went rock climbing with. He was the best man at my wedding. He was the person I wanted to be my partner on the amazing race. And he was the person that I wanted to hike the Pacific Crest Trail with. All things that never got off the ground. But the van journey, that happened. At graduation, he just hit the road with no end in sight. Now, it's not entirely clear in the interview, but John spent 2 years from 1999 to 2001 traveling. He crisscrossed the country, easily covering over 16,000 kilometers or 10,000 miles if you're still stuck in the imperial system. And while it might seem something that everybody does now, just check Instagram and the cost of old Westphalias, but John was an old school traveler. His journey wasn't for likes, his was for adventure. And he was not part of the gig economy. He had to stop and work seasonal jobs. And now my conversation with John Clagett. Well, welcome, John Clagett, and thanks for joining me, mate. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join me on Skippycast.
It's good to be here.
And you know why you're here, mate, because you're the man with the van.
Yeah, and 20 years ago, you were in it with me.
Damn, 20 years ago. Was it that long?
I think it was in 2000, so I might be lying, 18 years.
Actually, no, it was I think 99 is when I first heard you planning about it. So just to give a little bit of background, you and I met in Australia when you were on student exchange. You were doing environmental science just the same as I was, and we were living out at Edith Cowan University student housing. Wow, that was a blast from the past. Now, that was over 20 years ago.
On the Joondalup campus there in Perth.
So was that your first big trip? Was that your first big travel adventure? Before we get to your van trip, let's start with your initial adventure and why you wanted to be a traveler. But was your trip to Australia as student exchange, was that the first one?
Yeah, that would be the first big trip, and it's probably still the biggest trip I've taken. You know, I've had a chance to visit Mexico and Canada, but, going across to the Southern Hemisphere and being there for a year is the biggest trip.
Now, what was the reason behind it? Why did you actually do it? And certainly, why did you go to Edith Cowan?
Well, the exchange program that they had at the University of Missouri had relations with Edith Cowan University, and they had an exchange. So, 6 students would go over there, 6 students would come back over here, and it was, a straight exchange, and they had that set up with the universities. So that worked out good.
So that was your only Australia option, Perth?
I think so. I could have tried to dial in another program on my own, but it was the thing that was already ready to go. It was
the one that was set up. Because, I mean, for anybody who doesn't know about student exchange, generally universities get these little cooperative agreements with different universities, and we had my home university was Edith Cowan. We had something set up with the University of Missouri. They sent us students, and we didn't send them any because it really wasn't an even exchange. I remember when I went, there was like an 11-person deficit.
Yeah, there was. I think they were trying to get more people over to the U.S. And it doesn't seem like anybody in Australia was biting on that. But I don't blame them because I thought it was better being in Australia than it was in Missouri.
I don't know. Missouri had a lot to offer. I loved Missouri, mate. And, remember I went.
You did. Yeah. You spent, was it a semester in the winter there?
I spent a semester there, and I was in the fall, and then I went to Auburn University and spent some time there. But look, the show's about you, mate. Have you always been a travel junkie? Has it always been in your blood?
I don't know if it's necessarily travel per se, but just adventure, seeing something new, seeing something different, whether it's, in the backyard. I had a tree house and it was adventure, having a rope swing, riding bikes off of a ramp, so there's that kind of sense of adventure. And that's, traveling has that adventure element in it.
Because you were a rock climber and all this sort of stuff, right?
Yeah, and that's a fun adventure. Not necessarily. There's the things that I like about those adventures, and if you have a focus of I'm going to go on a climbing adventure, then it's an adventure along the way, but you have kind of a goal. So for me, I guess my goal on exchange was, get out of the state, see something different, and at the time I was kind of in a lull. There was this great girlfriend that I had that she ended up breaking up with me after I broke up with this other woman, that love of my life. And I'm like, I broke up with her for you. And then you dumped me. And then I'm like, shit, this sucks. I got to get out of here. So I went to Australia for a year.
It sounds like Delilah right up until now, man. So who was your travel inspiration? Was there anybody in your family who was a traveler?
My sister did an exchange to Mexico when she was there. I remember the first trip really out of the state I did was on vacation to Mexico, and then I guess really living in Kansas where I was born. I lived there till a freshman in high school, and then we moved to Orlando, Florida, and that was like totally different than being in the Midwest. Of like, oh, there's people that aren't white, there's different cultures, people are speaking other languages. Just that really just opened up a world of the international community that we had in Central Florida at the time, and so that was a big thing.
So you weren't in Kansas anymore, Dorothy?
Exactly, it's not in Kansas anymore. But then I ended up going back to school in the Midwest, and then I'm like, oh, I need a little adventure here, so that's where Australia fit in quite nicely.
Now, when I was at the University of Missouri, which was 99 that fall, you and I caught back up again, and you were the best man at my wedding as well. I should probably say that. I had limited choices, but you were a good choice, mate.
Oh, nice. Nice.
But in 99, you and I became quite good friends when we were at the University of Missouri because we did a lot of the same classes together and we goofed around together. And that was the time when you started to plan the van journey, man, right?
Yeah, I mean, I graduated kind of in an off time. I graduated in December of 99, so it was kind of not in the typical May. And I remember, I think it was after that, probably in maybe January, that I was shopping for vans and ended up buying the Chevy G20 conversion van, 1980. So it was kind of an old school van. It had the carpet on the roof and the ceiling. It was one of these kind of luxury vans. And then I spent the next couple of months outfitting it to be more of a camper van.
When you were doing this, though, you really had the idea that you were going to be an on-the-road hobo, right?
Yeah, I didn't think of it that way. I thought of it as I was going to be working seasonal jobs, and I'll have, a place to be when I'm at these seasonal jobs or in between seasonal jobs. In a van, I mean, you can park it in a normal parking spot. You can sleep in the back. I had a little kitchen outfitted in there. And so it was a multi-purpose tool. And one was just, I graduated college. I had $4,000 saved up. I outfitted this van and I did a 4-month road trip.
Now, the thing is, when I first met you, the van thing came gradually over time. I remember you started to talk about it and started to think about, the possibility of just, screwing off and living this adventure lifestyle. How did it actually come? How did the seed form to you eventually saying, okay, I'm driving? Where did it come from? Did you see somebody else do it, or did you just woke up one day and said, I got to do something?
Well, I've seen a lot of people do the RV thing, and RVs are big and cumbersome. Over in Australia, you had a lot of it seemed like the combis and the people, doing a 6 months holiday in Australia, in their own country and doing that. And so, I saw people having some of these more caravan type things that were much smaller. And then over in the US, you have all these kind of senior citizens in these huge, monstrous RVs. And I'm like, I can't afford that. I can't park that anywhere. So I kind of blended the idea of is the Chevy van is a little bit bigger than the Volkswagen hippie van or the Westfalia, so it was a little bit more, I thought, reliable and a little bit bigger, and it can kind of blend in. And so after I made the decision of, yeah, I'm going to get a van, I'm going to live in it, I'm going to work seasonal jobs, work summer camp, work this, outdoor school, different things. And that's going to be my tool to make it all happen, so I don't have to have an apartment. And so most of my stuff that I needed for a couple of years was in that van.
See, that's a true hobo life. I mean, the idea behind a hobo isn't just to be on the streets itinerant. That's not a hobo. A hobo used to travel from town to town, working as he went. And so you were really a van hobo.
Yeah, and I think about, I went, I was in California, and then I thought, oh, I need to go to the East Coast for this job that I had at this summer camp in Pennsylvania. Actually, I think I was in Colorado when I made that decision. I'm like, oh yeah, I got this job in Pennsylvania. So then I drove there, and then I'm out there, and I'm like, oh no, I don't want to be there. I want to get this job out in California. So yeah, it just enabled me to kind of make the trek across the United States a couple of times, some with friends, some solo, some in a hurry. One of the trips I made from Minnesota to North Carolina, and I didn't have any heat, and that was kind of a bugger because the heater core leaked during the trip, and so I disabled it so I could still drive the car, and not get radiator steam blown in my face while I'm driving down the highway.
I mean, the thing is, you chose the van because, I mean, Westfalers are really expensive and Chevys are fairly reliable. They got a big V8 engine, but your one still was a bit quirky, even if it did have Star Trek captain's chairs.
They were cool, and the ones in the front could flip around, so then the whole van becomes this like little mini lounge room. So that was pretty awesome.
I remember that well. And you modified it because you actually built a little wooden stove contraption inside of it, right?
Yeah, I guess the main two things that I did was the little kitchen unit and then the bed. And I did have a camp stove that I could use in there, and I could kind of close it up so all the stuff wouldn't fall around while I'm driving around. And I did eventually anchor it into the van, because I did have one time I was going around a sharp curve and this whole thing tipped over. So it's a little bit of a work in progress of, fine tuning it so it didn't fall over.
Yeah, because you're no carpenter. I remember seeing it. It was functional, but it definitely wasn't aesthetically pleasing.
Well, it worked, and that was the key part.
It was functional. You could have. Was it a Trangier stove?
Yeah, that was the safest stove to use in there, because it's just, the fuel's not that flammable, and it's really able to control, compared to something like a Whisper Light, which I did use in the van one time, and I also had to use a fire extinguisher at the same time.
Now you went solo, right? Because I remember you. I can't remember if you asked me to go some of the way with you.
Oh yeah, yeah, I totally did. I was asking everybody I knew, let's go on a road trip, let's do this, let's do that. And
yeah, I should have done it. I mean,
you were there for a couple of, I want to say, a week where we were in Colorado.
Yeah, I know, but I should have done it from the beginning. I mean, mind you, two guys in a van, after a while, you got to go your separate ways, but I should have done a lot more of it. I probably would have avoided my impending divorce if I'd done that. But I remember you were heading off solo, but that wasn't the original plan. You were cool and keen to have somebody go with you, right?
Oh yeah, and the maiden voyage was me with Mary Jane and Susan, and they were able to hang out for probably about a month or two. I think Mary Jane had a month, and then she had to go back to Canada, and then Susan, I think, had 2 months, so she hung out for another month with me, and then after that I was solo on the trip. Yeah.
Now, I should say, though, Mary Jane and Susan were two Canadian exchange students that I knew and John knew from his time at Edith Cowan over in Western Australia. Now, the first thing is, okay, you're in the van, you've got it set up, you've got your wooden stove, you've graduated from school. Where did you go first?
Colorado. So at the time, my folks were living in Memphis, Tennessee. And so, that's relatively close to Missouri. So, I kind of worked for a couple of months to save up some money. I worked at an outdoor school, outdoor store. So I was also kind of stocking up on some outdoor gear too when I was working there. So I think it was mid-February, and I had a friend that needed a house sitter in Boulder. And I'm like, that's me. I'll house sit for you. So boom, the three of us drive over to Boulder, and we're house sitting for about a week. And then we're checking out some of the sites and going cross country skiing. We ended up building a snow cave on an overnight skiing trip and stayed in that. So that was just some of the adventures that we had. We also were trying to check out climbing areas. And so I think the second place we went to was southeastern Colorado. And right now the name's slipping my mind. Garden of the Gods, where they have these towers that just come right out of the flat ground. And so it was a bit of hey, where can we go climbing? And being in the southern part of Colorado was, even though by that time was probably beginning of March, you could still pick some nice days and you could still get some climbing in. Then we made it further west from Colorado out to Utah and did some climbing out there at Arches National Park.
Wow. One of the trips I remember, and I think this is what got me jealous and got me interested in Joshua Tree, was you going through Joshua Tree in California. When did you get to there and how? So you went to Colorado, you went to Utah, and when there?
Yeah. So then after Utah, then we went south there, made it through part of Nevada. By that time, I think Mary Jane was not with us, and it was just Susan and I. And we're like, oh, great. Where are you going to go climbing in the winter? Joshua Tree. That's just known for having mild weather in the winter, and you don't want to climb there in the summer. But we were there in the kind of the early springtime, and there was great climbing there to be had. I also remember Susan caught the Greyhound from Vegas to go all the way back to Toronto. And I thought, how many weeks is that going to take on the Greyhound?
She caught the dirty dog?
Oh, yes.
It's funny you should say that. I was just looking up about people who were talking about stories about riding the dirty dog. And, I rode the dirty dog from Auburn University to Columbia, Missouri. And it took 24 hours. And I want to tell those stories, but I need to speak to somebody who got one of those 30-day passes and rode the dirty dog around the country. But that's an aside. So you're solo and you're in California, and is this when you head east, young man?
After Joshua Tree, I'm like, I gotta see some other things. And it was, me solo. So I saw the Grand Canyon, and then Yosemite, and then San Francisco. So that was my first adventure to San Francisco, because I ended up meeting somebody in Joshua Tree that was living in San Francisco. So I made that contact, and, which was writing her name down on a piece of paper, because I didn't have a cell phone then, before cell phones.
Oh, it was in the olden times, mate. I'm surprised you didn't have a chisel and a piece of rock.
Right. So, I wrote down a phone number, and then, here I am on a payphone saying, hey, I'd like to come to San Francisco. She's like, oh, yeah, come on over. This is where I'm at, So I'm looking at a map, trying to figure out where she lives in San Francisco. And parking that van in San Francisco was tough. Luckily it didn't get broken into at that time. But later on, after I was not living in the van, I did park it in San Francisco and then get robbed.
You got robbed?
Yeah.
They stole your Trangia stove?
No, they stole a bunch of CDs, my change purse, a jacket, and they jacked up the little triangle window that you can flip it around and blow air in.
Okay, so now that I think on, I must have caught up because how long between San Francisco and you and I catching up in Colorado?
Shoot, I can't quite remember.
We caught up in June.
June.
Well, before
Okay,
actually,
so
it would
yeah,
have been
I would have
end.
done San Francisco. Probably would have been, might have been April, May, and I was probably on my way back from that to Colorado. And then I think after that, then I got a job at the summer camp in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, because you were leaving. I know you did a top ropes course or something in Colorado.
Oh yeah, there were some good trainings to make me more hireable for these seasonal jobs I was working.
Because I wanted to say about when you and I hooked up in Colorado, it was just before I was due to get married in the June, and I had, I think, a couple of weeks. And if I remember correctly, the only 3 CDs we could listen to were all Jimmy Buffett because you'd had CDs stolen. Was that, am I timing this right?
Um, yeah, that might be right. If you recall, I only had 3 CDs. That might have been it.
Because for me, I mean, driving around in the van was such a blast, and I knew of people who did this sort of thing. You've heard about people who do it for, particularly for rock bands. People who were deadheads or people who were into fish. And that wasn't your thing. You were just doing the climbing, and it was a completely different way of the world back then because not everything was a selfie or a Facebook post. You did it for the love of travel, right?
Right. I mean, and we didn't have that technology. I mean, yeah, people had cell phones, but I didn't.
Well, the number of people who had cell phones, you could, I mean, they were the urban professionals. They weren't the likes of you and I.
Yeah.
And they were analog anyway. I don't think they, you wouldn't have been able to do it just through the roaming costs.
Yeah, that's true.
I remember getting off in Colorado and going to the library to check my email and things like that. It was just a different way, but you meeting people and meeting people along the way, people were very trusting. I met up with some guys after I left you in Colorado and went to Rocky Mountain National Park, and you just meeting that girl and going off to San Francisco. Do you think that freedom exists today of people just meeting people and just going off and doing their adventures together?
I think it's a little different now. I think people are a little bit more wary about it, maybe a little bit more guarded. But I did, when you see people that are out there living this traveling style and you meet like-minded people, you hit it off because it's hard to find. And then you make these contacts and, it's a little more genuine when you actually write somebody's name on a piece of paper and a phone number. And when you get a phone call from them because you got to stop at a payphone and either put money in it or you get a calling card and you got to type in all these numbers for your passcode and you got, $5 and you can talk for, a certain amount of time. That's a little bit more meaningful than just pulling out a cell phone and calling you up or sending a text.
Well, I mean, also just the personal relationships of being with somebody and talking with somebody rather than having them scrolling off onto a phone. I mean, you and I, when we were traveling, we got into some interesting conversations. I just know that, and you were all about the cheap or free when it came to the overnight. We stayed in, I don't know how many layaways and, just in a state forest or something. And it was different to me, but you were so accustomed to it by then. Did you never ever get scared about where you were, or you never worried about the infamous bandits in the middle of the night?
Oh, yeah, you start getting good at where can I park for free and not get hassled. And my favorite was the National Forest, because they don't have regulations on where you can go. And there's a lot of national forests. And so you get the map out and you're like, okay, there's a national forest on this edge of the town. Let me drive up this road and, just freestyle in it of trying to find a place to park. So that was the best. And then you got some issues of, do you have water? Where are you going to go to the bathroom? Going number one is no problem, but it's a little bit more problematic going number two. And if you're in the woods, you just dig a hole and take care of business. Showers can be a little tough to come by. But the problem is when you're in more of an urban area, and that's where the biggest challenges come in. Am I allowed to park here on the street? Is parking allowed, or is it, attracting the police to come over there and hassle you?
Now, did you ever park in the old Walmart? I've heard about in the past people used to do the overnights in the Walmarts. Did you ever do anything like that?
Yeah. definitely have done that. And, you kind of park out there on the edge of the parking lot, and there's other people out there doing the same thing. And I felt safe, but it wasn't necessarily quiet. And you don't have to worry about the bathroom factor because, Walmart's usually open and you just go in there, and it's probably a pretty good idea for them because then you're shopping in their store, So that was,
I don't know if it's a good idea, but it's certainly convenient for you. I
yeah.
mean, easy access to Natty Light.
Yeah, and that was kind of the fallback of where's the Walmart in case you can't find a good spot, But when you are, hoboing it like that, you tend to try to find things like a public library.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because you can use the internet. They have a bathroom in there. It's usually a safe place to be. And one time I was in Southern California and I'm in the public library parking lot, and the library closed. So I'm sitting there in the van thinking, okay, is this going to be an okay spot to overnight it in the van in the parking lot?
Mm-hmm.
I can wait until they open, use the bathroom the next morning, check on email. And I was just kind of sitting there trying to figure it out. Or do I drive up to the national forest, which wasn't too far away? And then the police helped me make that decision. So they knocked on the door, open up. I'm sitting in my van, it's daylight out, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we got complaints about this dodgy van." I'm like, "Okay, that must be me." Right.
Whereabouts was that?
I was in Hemet in Southern California.
A pretty little white boy like you, and they kicked you out?
Well, no. I mean, once they realized who I was and what was up, they're like, okay, yeah, you're not a threat. And they're like, you're in a high crime area, the meth capital, I think they described it. And they said, you can't hang out here. The cops are going to be hassling you all night. And they looked through my van and they realized I'm not trouble. I'm just in the van. And they said, hey, go up the road to the national forest. And so I did. And that worked out fine there.
So let's do a quick rundown. Okay, from Colorado, you went and you did courses up there. I recall you being in Pennsylvania for a while. Is that right?
Yeah, I did a summer over there, getting some experience with children and building up my resume.
Okay, for Pennsylvania, what was the rundown till you eventually settled down in California? How long did this journey last from end to end?
There was about 2 years that I was basically living in the van, and I would say it ended when I got the job at the Coloma Outdoor Discovery School in California, Northern California, and that's when I was living in a real house instead of in the van. And by that time, I was ready for it. I'm like, get me out of this. It can be cold. It's claustrophobic, and I remember when actually I took a bath. There's this great big clawfoot bathtub at the house I was renting. And I took a bath and I was like, wow, this is great.
But there was no real plan. It just came to an end. It just naturally came to an end and ran down.
Because I had a steady job with a real house to live in. And I guess.
But was that the plan? I mean, was it a situation where when you were looking for that job, you were ready to end?
It's hard to say. It just kind of naturally came to that. I mean, I knew I wasn't going to be in the van forever. It would be, while I'm working these transitional jobs. And then by the time I think I was 26, maybe at the time, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm getting a little bit more of a real job that pays a little bit more. And I guess that was the transition of getting a more steady job.
Okay, it's almost like you became a landlubber from your road-bound cruiser.
Well,
when you came to the end of it, was it everything you expected it would be? Because I mean, from the time you initially set out at the end of your graduation till you got off the docks in California and had a house, like you said, you were ready. But was the journey everything that you'd expected it to be from the beginning, or did you just have no expectation whatsoever?
There are some expectations, and here's the thing is I had total freedom. I could do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. And it's like, wow, do humans really need that much choice and that much freedom? Give me 3 or 4 choices to choose from, not infinity. So that was an interesting thing about learning a little bit about myself of, I didn't necessarily know if I could do anything I wanted, what could I do?
Was it low stress?
I guess it's a little stressful trying to find a place to park the van, and you see this road that looks like it could be a good pull out, but you're not sure. And then there's a couple places I pull out, and I'm like, okay, I don't know if I can turn around. There's this one place that was real muddy, and okay, I can't turn around, and now I'm trying to back up, and luckily I didn't get stuck. So that was good. I guess the probably the most stressful time was when I decided to watch a movie and I didn't know anything about the movie, and I'm like, oh yeah, that time works out good. And then it's a scary movie about this guy getting murdered in the woods, right? So after the movie, I drive my van into the woods, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna camp here. This is great. And all I can think is the movie and how I'm going to be the victim that was in the movie because I'm in this van in the woods. And so, yeah, that wasn't a good idea.
So the most difficult part was because it's got to be a little bit of a lonely life. Obviously, you've got some logistical problems there. Which would you say was the most difficult? The loneliness at times?
Yeah, it's a lot better being with people, but I wasn't going to let being lonely stop me from doing something, whether I did a solo road trip or a solo backpacking trip in the Grand Canyon or a solo backpacking in Yosemite. I wasn't going to let that stop me.
And the most enjoyable bit was just the absolute freedom.
I think it's not necessarily the freedom was nice, but when I'm with some friends, we got something cool we're going to go see, and then it's just the adventure going to it. It's not necessarily seeing that thing. It's just the adventure to get there. So like when you and I were there, like, oh yeah, let's go to this one place, so now that you got a plan, and we went and saw some of these ghost towns.
Yeah, because I remember at the time you were wondering what the hell was I going on about, wanting to be at the ghost town, and I dragged you along to St. Elmo, I think it was. And that was, I enjoyed it, and I think you got a kick out of it in the end, didn't you?
Yeah, and they had this carbide lamp I ended up buying. You put this carbide in water, and it's this old lamp so you can see under the earth when you're in a hard rock mine.
It was an experience. I enjoyed so much about that Colorado trip, and I still remember it today because, if you remember, I took so many photos. I think I took 7 rolls of film, which by today's standards is nothing. And you took me to some great places. Glenwood Springs will forever remain a highlight. You and I remember we were sitting there in Glenwood Springs, and we came across a guy from South Shields in the northeast of England, and he was building. And at the time, he was looking for workers, and I think he was offering like $25 an hour, which to us was a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking, yeah, I could do this life, because I remember he was saying he would offer you all board and lodging, and it was $25 an hour. You just had to help him build some houses. And that was really a cool life, going through Crested Butte, or Krusty Butt as you called it, going to Red Rock and seeing a graduation, which to me looked like a rock concert. All of that stuff was amazing. But the absolute freedom of it, the idea that you didn't have to be somewhere tomorrow, you could just be today. Obviously I left you and I went off and did my own thing for a little bit, but I got a taste of the van life that I wished that I could have experienced a little bit more. How did you feel when it was over?
I was kind of proud of like, yeah, I did this. And, and it's not like there's different pieces, so there was the 4-month road trip. And when that was over, it was a little sad of, hey, I want to do it again. And I never had another 4 months and $4,000 available to go do that, so that was a unique thing. But I really didn't look as the next year and a half as something I had planned. It just sort of happened. And I don't know that I really thought formally, oh yeah, this is over now. But I guess when you look back at it, it is, oh yeah, it was over when I did live in a real house. And it definitely was over when that poor van overheated and blew the head gasket. And I guess for me, symbolically, the death of the van was definitely sad. And I didn't have the heart to get rid of it, so I hung on to it. I paid non-op so I could still have it registered. And then I'm like, okay, there's not going to be a resurrection of the van. And I think it turned out having to pay $50 to get it towed off.
Oh, that must have been a sad day.
Yeah, that was. We were on our way to a rock concert, and the van had a leak in the radiator. So every time I drove it, I'd top it off with water. Well, this one time I just didn't tighten the radiator cap tight enough, and then drive up some steep hills, and that basically overheated and blew the head gasket, and that was it.
Before we get too much into the van and the end of the trip, what could you say you learned from it, though? I had a question about, was it more about testing yourself or something more spiritual? But what would you say you learned from your adventure?
Even though what I wanted to do wasn't in the, social norms, do it anyways. I mean, trying to tell somebody, yeah, I have a college degree and I'm going to live in a van. And they're like, what? And you can't talk about living in a van with somebody saying down by the river, because it has this, this negative, white trash.
Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, this white trash connotation. But you know what?
Yeah.
Just because that's what the social norms were, do it anyways. And it worked. And I'd do it again.
Yeah. How do you think you would do it differently if you had to do it today? We've already talked about the fact that you would, Jesus Christ, we've got a cell phone, we've got the internet in our hands. The world's very different today. Do you think it would be better or worse if you did it today? How do you think you would do it?
Well, there's the ideas that I can think of on my own. And I don't necessarily know that I'm good at thinking of good ideas to do. So I had the idea of doing a road trip, and I had some ideas, but other people added, say, hey, what about this? And I'm like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. I should do that. So if you had an adventure to do that you leave it up to somebody else, maybe directing you to an area that you may or may not do, that would be cool, because something I didn't think of. And I look at my job now, working for state parks for the last 12 years. I don't know, I would have came up with the idea, like right now I'm living on Angel Island, to live on Angel Island.
Mm.
Because I work at parks, that came possible when I looked at some of the jobs that come up. So I think if I were doing it, I might have a higher meaning to it. Like, a lot of people do this travel thing, but they might go to help somebody in a natural disaster, like hurricane relief. So you might be supporting hurricane relief, and because of it, you're going to go to some things that you may not have known about. And so if you can get involved with, I don't know, a greater good or something like that. So for me, because I've been working for parks, I'm going to do something like this again, but they're going to call it a park host. So where I would go in an RV of some type to a park to do a job for a certain amount of time. And then I would pick another park and I would go to that. And then the cool thing is the stuff that you don't know that you're going to learn when you're at the park, and the people that you're going to meet is unknown. And if you try to plan it yourself, you can't. I don't think I could have planned it as good as I did. And it came out really good because it just unfolded sporadically.
I mean, that's the point. And I think that hobo travel should be sporadic, and it should be unfettered by time schedules, which is one of the things that I've described the show as. But doing it differently today, people tend to do it because they want to show other people, whereas you did it for yourself. And you talk about a deeper meaning. So you're saying that going to Burning Man wasn't necessarily a deeper meaning? Because you did Burning Man in the van, didn't you?
No, I never took the van to Burning Man. It broke. It gave it up before but that would have been a great thing to take to Burning Man, because you have a shelter. You got this tin tent, the outside of you, and you can be in your shelter out of the wind. And that's one of the things. And you do have that kind of vagabond lifestyle because people are taking RVs, vans, or living in it. But it doesn't it's only a week, you know?
But I mean, the thing is, it's part of a greater journey. I know when you did Burning Man as well, it wasn't nearly as commercially crowded as it is today. What was the coolest thing you ever saw when you were traveling? Do you have something that you think, Jesus, that was awesome. You know, that was an experience that made the whole thing worthwhile. Just one thing.
That's hard to say.
I mean, you did the Grand Canyon. Did you hike it much of the Grand Canyon?
Yeah, I did a 3-day, 2 nights hike in there. I didn't go all the way down to the river, but I went from the I guess it's the South
Did you
Rim.
do the Bright Angel Trail?
No, I didn't do the Bright Angel. I did Horseshoe Mesa, and I went halfway down around this mesa and then back up.
Okay.
So that was pretty cool seeing that. You know, I think the neatest thing is we did a pretty hefty drive through. I think it was Capitol Reef National Park, which is one of the less known national parks in the United States, and it's in like South Utah. And
Mm-hmm.
we went from like the north part of the park, and we went out the south entrance. And on the map, it had advisory, high clearance vehicle required. And I'm like, oh, I wonder if this is a high clearance vehicle. And it was high clearance enough. We got through it, and on the way out, the park employee at the kiosk was really impressed that we made that van the whole way through there. And that was pretty amazing, just because I felt probably a lot like it would be if you're in a covered wagon. It's just us. We're out there. We got this trail. We don't really know where it goes, but we think it does. And we made that adventure. And
Now, high clearance because of watermark, right?
I just think it's because there might be rocks or bumps in it, and taking a Honda Civic on it wouldn't work.
Sure.
It was mostly dry in a deserty environment.
So that's the parks. Did you go any city places that you went to the city for? I mean, obviously you went to San Francisco, but did you go any city places specifically to see the city, or were they just places to be avoided?
There were places to be avoided, and a couple of places that I was specifically trying to go to near a big city. One of them was Red Rocks, and
Okay.
that's near Las Vegas. And I do remember going in there and doing stuff like getting an oil change, going to the grocery store, and trying to go in there where you're not in the thick of it, where it's not all chaotic.
But you weren't there to gamble. You weren't there to do the strip. You were there because I've been to Red Rocks, and not to be confused with Red Rock out there in Colorado, because you and I went there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I went and checked out, and they have the burros walking around, and I tell people who go to Vegas now, there are gems that aren't the strip. Red Rocks is a place that is amazing, and some great hiking, great geological landforms, because they're all sedimentary rock.
Yeah, it's pretty spectacular. I always found it a little easier to be alone in the wilderness than it is alone in the city. If you know somebody, you're visiting a friend, yeah, I'll visit somebody in the city. Hey, the places to go, where to park, all that stuff. I didn't find that fun trying to be a solo tourist in a city.
Yeah, because I must admit, the gentle couple of beers with you at the end of the day. There was one time you and I went and bought some beers when we were in Colorado, and I've got the photos of the storm was rolling in, and we stayed in just a little layaway, and I've got some photos of that as well, and just having a beer and that layaway and the storms coming in. It was really, you just felt like there was nothing else in the world that you would rather do.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. I think my next one is a boat adventure.
Yes, that's in the show. There's modes of travel that I want to cover, right? One of them is obviously the van. The other one's riding the dirty dog. I'm also interested in trying to find somebody who has done rails, whether it be Eurail in Europe or even in South America or something. But, when I first came to the States, I wanted to do the 30-day Amtrak. And kayaking is another one, kayak or canoe, because people like down in South Florida stay on the chickies out in the the waterway.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one is long distance on a boat. The thing that got me interested in travel to begin with was, well, it wasn't necessarily World Safari. World Safari really kicked it off, though. Have you seen the film World Safari with Albie Mangels?
No.
And he hops on like a 17th century Dutch boat for part of it, not for the whole trip. And I remember at the time thinking that would just be insane. Because, he goes to an island and they hop off islands just wherever the hell they go. The world's full of deserted islands. So where do you want to go on a boat?
Well, just here in the Bay, just following up the river to Sacramento. I don't know if it's a 2 or 3 day boat ride, or it's hard to tell how far I can go, in a day on a boat without getting all your butt all cramped up. Because the boat I have is a tiny boat. It's 14 feet. But going up there would be neat. And, if you had a bigger boat, that you could actually sleep on, there's all kinds of places you could go.
Now, you said you work in the state parks. You work up at Angel Island. I've known you for a while, and you've been working in state parks for a while. And I've kind of, to some degree, followed you around from NorCal to SoCal and the what is it you called it? The Inland Empire and the Orange Groves. And now you're back up to NorCal. Is living on Angel Island enough to scratch that adventure itch?
It is. I mean, just getting off the island's an adventure. And it does seem like that adventure itch always comes with an element of solitude and loneliness. And there's definitely that factor out here. But I got enough adventure to keep me excited. I mean,
because you were losing that adventure itch when you were down there in the Inland Empire and you were doing the orange groves. I remember, and living in the RV and the exclusive nudist colony. As adventurous as that seems to me, I remember at the time. No, it was when you were at where was it? You were they had the fort.
Fort Tejon. It was still in Southern California on the Grapevine. But yeah, that was hard to find some, that adventure there. And it's just the desert's just such a tough environment to be comfortable in, whether it's the wind or the dry or the dust or the heat.
Because, I mean, I remember the place you had in Coloma was
Coloma. The river was there. There was adventure right there. I mean, just whitewater rafting on the river and hiking. And so now I feel like I have that adventure here on Angel Island. I mean, I got a kayak and I'm sea kayaking. I got a boat. I mean, it was an adventure just taking my small boat around Alcatraz and under the Golden Gate. So I have that adventure right here at my fingertips.
And I have to admit, John has pulled some crap on me over the years. One being pulling up to a nudist colony and then telling me, "Hey, Dave, by the way, this is a nudist colony." The other one was when we were in Coloma and I arrived before you finished work and you saying, "Hey, go and have a dip in the river," which was like
freezing cold.
And the day was as hot as hell, but the river was freezing cold. I don't know if you deliberately did these things to me. They just happened to pan out that way.
I can't remember the dip in the river, me planning that one out, but I do remember the nudist resort of like, what do I do? I'm like, wait a second.
Just don't tell him.
Is he going to flake if he knows? If he's riding the fence and he knows where he's at, he might say, heck no, I'm not going. And I'm like, okay, I think you can handle this, and you're not so uptight that you're going to be like, take me back home. This is terrible. And so, we rocked up and you were in disbelief. You're like, no, they don't have these things. And then you got out, and I don't know how many, naked fat people you had to see before you believed it.
I have to say, I did not strip off for the audience, and I did see some things that I thought that I would only see in National Geographic. And I will leave it there. Now, the van. Just to finish on the van, man. You had that thing towed. Did you name it, by the way?
No. It was an Explorer van. They had the little package and it said Explorer on the back. And
but you didn't give it a name like Blue Bertha or something?
No.
I do remember those captain's chairs, and it did have decor straight out of the 80s. and you sat in the captain's chair, and you did feel a little bit like Captain Kirk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Well, R.I.P. for the van, I suppose. I'm not surprised you held on to it, but you also had an affinity of holding on for a Willys van for years and years as well.
Yeah, there was a Willys pickup that from high school that we were trying to restore and rebuild, and my buddy Clay still has it out in Florida, and he's gotten a couple of additional Willys pickups since then.
Okay. Well, look, I'm going to wrap the show up. We're kind of getting down to the mark. I've got some photos that I'm going to stick on the website that shows you in your van, and maybe you and me in your van. And you're out at Angel Island now. Do you have you don't do the Twitter or that social media rubbish, do you?
No.
So if anybody wants to contact you, and they do contact me through the site, I can pass them on to you, and they'll see you out at Angel Island doing your thing, right?
Yeah.
And I should describe, because I mean, people will go over to the website and check out what you look like, and I have to say that John is, when I first met him, was very frat boyish, but on the inside he definitely wasn't. And you're still that way, right?
Yeah. Well, I ended up joining a fraternity, and yeah.
Proves that anybody can jump in a van and go places, right?
Right. And everybody in the fraternity is like, "Oh my gosh, what are you doing?" You know, I mean, they're working on these business degrees and wearing their khakis and their polo shirts, and here I am dirtbagging in the van.
Okay. And because one of the photos is you with the skis on the back, and you obviously had your rock climbing equipment and backpacks and enough Gatorade bottles to carry half of the Colorado River.
Yeah, I definitely wanted to stock up on water for drinking and cooking and washing.
I think about what it was like when you did it, and I've talked to other people about, these things where they just get out and go. And as much as I would like to go out and have an adventure today, and I probably will at some stage, I think there's an element of a golden age that is gone because of technology. When you traveled and you were traveling alone in Colorado, you were alone. You were really alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, you weren't a Facebook post away from 50 to 100 to 300 people. You were alone.
Or a phone call to say, hey, or even having directions on your phone.
How often did you travel without direction? I mean, when you and I drove, it was really a town to town to town thing. I don't know if there was any serious plan when we got out of Denver. I mean, we went to Glenwood Springs, and then we went. I wanted to talk about some of the characters, because I remember we met a guy on the road, and he was, I can't remember if he was ex-military or not, but he was just walking, man, hitching and walking. And we caught up with him in a parking lot, and it mustn't have been too far from Glenwood Springs. Okay, well, look, I enjoyed it, and it was a fun trip. It was enjoyable when I saw you. I wish I could have done more of it. And the idea of just getting out into a van and pissing off is something that I think is a dream come true. And thanks, John, for taking the time to talk to me about your little van adventure. I think it would be different today if somebody went out to do it, but I definitely would encourage somebody to get out in a van. Would you do so as well, John?
Absolutely.
All right, well, look, thanks for joining me, John. I hope to see you up at Angel Island. And if you do get any email or something out of this, mate, be sure to show them a good time.
Sounds great. Take care.
And there's another episode in the bag, and of course thanks to John for talking to me. Now I slowly want to start ticking off different modes of transport I've done by foot and I've done by van, but I am interested in all different forms of transport that people take, whether it's hitching a ride or jumping a rail car or a backpack in a plane, or those who, like John talked about, choose the boat life. I want to talk to them all. What made them do it? Now the boat life is something that particularly interests me. Aside from Albie Mangle's World Safari being my inspiration when I was young, I met a lad years ago when I was in my mid-20s who had left the Navy and lived on a sailboat in Hillary's Boat Harbour in Western Australia. Now, I would love to speak to him now, or people like him, and he certainly lived an interesting life in the 1990s. So if you have any suggestions or you think you know somebody who would make a great candidate for an interview, please reach out. Other than that, check out the show notes at skippycast.org, as well as a few pictures of John and his van. And if you want to leave a comment for me or John, feel free to do it at the website or at the Skippycast Facebook page. Positive or negative, all feedback is welcome. Now, the next show is a follow-on from the Nan Manders interview, and also has nothing to do with hobos. Well, kind of, at least. It's an interview with John Veerman, who was the host of Trailside in the first 3 seasons. He was gracious enough to be interviewed, and maybe with his show travel schedule, he can be considered somewhat nomadic. And if you're a little bit confused about what Trailside is, head on over to YouTube and do a search. There are episodes there, as well as on Vimeo, for both Any Place Wild and Trailside. And finally, special thanks to the band Tom Jode and Kelly Weiss for providing music for the show. And of course, thank you to you all for listening to Skippycast.